I'm Emily Reese, and you're listening to Pixelated Audio.
All right, welcome back to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game audio, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene.
Yes, and we are talking with Emily Reese today. So, folks that may or may not know, Emily Reese is something of a legend in the VGM podcasting community. Emily has been doing podcasts, I don't know how far back, 2011, 2012?
Wow.
11,
It's been quite, I remember listening to Top Score. Well, before I even discovered Brian's show and ended up getting roped into that. So we're going quite a ways back, but it was a really awesome show. I got so much great insight. And when I ran into you at VGMCon, I knew I had to talk to you. So I'm really glad that you're here joining us on the show to talk about your experiences.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me. It was great to meet Eugene, and I'm just excited to chat with both of you.
Yeah, the Top Scorer, that was one of my first introductions to the whole wild world of game audio outside of the box, right? Listen to game audio growing up all the time, but nobody really analyzing and talking about it. And so this was one of kind of the first forays into really taking it outside of the game and listening to it and appreciating it in a different context. And I think that you inspired not only us, but like a lot of other podcasters or just people in general, just getting more into game audio. So I think your reach has been just so vast, and we appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. Yeah, it was the same kind of thing for me. I really hadn't listened to it much outside of gaming either. You know, I mean, it just kind of happened, and then suddenly now it's like all the time. It's like if I'm not listening to the radio where I work, like I'm listening to video game music, it seems like. So yeah, it's crazy.
Nice. Hey, well, tell us about yourself. There's some people that might be new to our show and new to your show and stuff. Mm-hmm. Give us some information about yourself.
Sure. I mean, I guess my main deal is radio. I've been doing radio since 2005. Which isn't normally how I say that. Usually I say 2005. But it's been so long now. And that's how I ended up here in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. And that's how I started Top Score. I was doing radio and at a classical station, Classical Minnesota Public Radio, which is a big deal in the world of classical music. And I felt really lucky to work there. And that's how Top Score started. And then I left there in 2015 and started Level with Emily Reese, or just Level with Emily, whatever the hell you want to call it, is fine. And when I started Top Score in 2011, that was with one of my dearest friends, Sam Keenan, who also produces the show and has been the mixer and producer since the day one, really, 2011, except for a small point of time when we were at Minnesota Public Radio together. He wasn't working on the show. That's a whole other story. But we've been working together really since then. So 12 years doing it, and it's just been great. So I just live in Minneapolis. I do the podcast weekly. I do all the prep for the interviews, and then I edit the show, and then I send it to Sam and he mixes it. And then we chat about it after he's done, or usually when he's kind of close to done with the mix, we hop on YouTube and talk about it together on Wednesdays. And then, we post it on Fridays. In addition to that, I produce a radio show called Native Lights, which all I do for that is the edit. I'm not the interviewer. That's a brother and sister here in the state of Minnesota that host the show, and they have on guests from the Native community. And so I edit that show, usually weekly. And then I am a newscaster at Minnesota Public Radio, so nothing to do with music. I just go on the radio, I read newscasts, I tell you the weather. On the weekends, I tell you what fun things are happening and things along those lines. So I pretty much work 7 days a week in some way, shape, or form, and just stay real busy. And most of it involves something I really love doing, whether it's being on the radio or editing audio or talking to people about music. So that's kind of it. I have a cat. She's awesome. And that's about it. I like to bike around. Yeah. What else do you want to know?
Oh no, that's totally fine. A tiny bit of, inside baseball, as I'm hearing you talk, I'm not going to have to do almost any work editing your voice. You're so articulate. It's like, yeah. I'm sure you're thinking the exact same thing as you're recording and editing these shows. And I'm like, you have definitely had a lot of experience in radio.
Well, I was just going to suggest, Gene, we just send over the rough draft over to Emily and have her do all the editing and just call it a day.
I'm pretty fast. I won't lie. I'm pretty fast at it, but I usually also only go through it once. I mean, almost. I can't even think of an example where I've gone through a show more than once. But that's not to say that sometimes it'll take me 4 days. But sometimes, like today's show, I didn't even start it until right around 10, and I finished at like 1:15. So that wasn't bad for an episode that's like an hour and 15 minutes long.
That's pretty good.
So that went pretty fast.
That's a really good rate of return, yeah.
It is, but that's also because of exactly what you were just saying, Gene, about how like it was a very articulate guest. And
that makes it so much easier.
And I just edit so differently. Like I used to take out all the ums and the uhs and the stutters. And I'm like, that's a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. Yeah. And so I really just try and let people, if possible, I just let them talk, Yeah.
Man. We fell into a similar thing. We used to edit our shows a lot more heavy to remove the ums and uhs. But we realized, the conversations are just really natural. And if people are going to have these, stutters or whatever, it's just kind of part of the experience and doesn't really matter too much. So
Mm-hmm.
we kind of loosened up as well on that front. Want to backtrack here for a second. We brought in the show with a track that I wanted to talk about, and it was a really great and happy track. This is called Towhee Grove. Did I say that right?
I think so. I'm not really sure, but it sounds good to me.
From Oxenfree by Scientific. Why bring in this track? You've been listening to this soundtrack a lot recently.
I have, because Oxenfree 2 is coming out, I think, in June of 2023, maybe July. I can't quite remember right off the top of my head, but soon. And I had never played the first, but honestly, I don't even know how I stumbled across Scientific, but I knew about him from Oxenfree, but I finally had him on my show last year, and I just loved talking to him, and we talked about Jet the Far Shore, which is also another just amazing soundtrack he did. And I'd never played Oxenfree, and I was like, well, I really enjoyed having that conversation with him so much about Jet and another game he did called Gibbon Beyond the Trees that I really wanted to like experience it properly. I mean, I don't really like saying that because sometimes it's just impossible to like have that kind of time to experience music in game, you know? Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I felt passionate about this one. So I was like, let's play Oxenfree. I don't play scary games. Let's give it a try. And, you know, I mean, his music is just so good. And so I've been playing that in prep for the second one and also listening to the soundtrack a lot, just so I can really get in the headspace to have just a great chat with him, because, you know, not all composers need to put a lot of time and thought and, you know, Easter eggs or whatever into their music. And then some composers do have that time or the need. And he does that kind of stuff. And I just think it's, I don't know, I want to know it really well.
Yeah, that is something we do often. We have guests on, and you know, we'll sometimes pull out knowledge for something they hadn't thought about in many, many years, because you know we talked to guests from many years ago, but we really try to do our due diligence and, you know, maybe not listen to their entire discography necessarily, but enough of it that we have a pretty good body of knowledge so that the conversation flows more naturally. And you know, it's and you know, just so it doesn't feel like we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's also we talked about this on one of our more recent episodes, that, you know, some of the games too were very intimate between the sound team or the single sound person, the designer or programmer, and the graphic designer. And so sometimes we almost feel like if we don't play the game ahead of time, we can't really fully appreciate what the team had to go through.
Right.
It's a lot different in, you know, sometimes more modern games where there's like, you know, 1,000 people working on a single game.
Right.
But a lot of the older stuff, a lot more intimate. So you know, they only take a few minutes to kind of at least get the gist of and feel out. So.
Well, before we jump into more about you, did you have another track you wanted to play? We're going to just ask you basically at random times, throw out a track.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And forgive me for needing to pause just to like look through my list of, because usually what I'm listening to, as you guys, I'm sure, deal with the same thing, is what I have interviews about.
Yeah.
Coming
oftentimes.
up, you know, I mean, not always, but, you know, I did just today hear music from Terra Nil. Do you guys know about this game, Terra Nil?
I don't.
Never heard of it.
It's an indie game that came out this year, and that's really cool, but I couldn't even tell you the name of the guy, so we're not going to do that one.
All right.
But, but that was cool. Here's a fun one. This I heard from, we have this perk that not too many people take us up on Patreon, probably because it's $10 a month, but it's like, I'll interview you, you know, we'll do like an interview about a game score or whatever. And so I find some really fun stuff that way, right? Where it's someone else telling me. And have you heard of the game, The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human?
I've heard of it. I've seen it on indie game sales. I know very little about it.
Yep. So I think it's a Swedish composer, Karl Flodin. I'm not sure how to say the last name, Flodin, Flodin. And the track is Welcome Home. And it's just a lovely synthy thing. So let's listen to that one. Yeah, it's only 2 minutes.
Perfect. that was Welcome Home from the game. Let me see if I got it right. It's quite a long title.
I know.
Was it The Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human, composed by Karl Flodin? And what just a beautiful spacey synthy track that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Lost in the Deep Blue Sea feeling to me. It's like
Yeah.
a little terrifying, but like in a good way.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I like it too.
How did you hear this?
I heard this from a patron of the show, a supporter of our show that I have had the chance to interview about some of his favorite game music. And this was one of the tracks that he put in his list. I mean, I just loved it. Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anything about the game, but it's
Me
like
either.
an indie sale something, Gene, you said too?
It's one of those games that tends to make the rounds. It's notable enough that you'll kind of see it on, GOG or Steam or one of these other humble bundles. It has, if I remember, it has like kind of a cool like pixel art style, a little bit like what am I thinking? I think it's like, I don't even remember, like, you're going to Aquatic Ruins and stuff like that. I think I might be thinking of a different game. There's a lot of games that kind of fit that theme.
Yep, didn't play it.
Yeah, I guess
me neither.
I'm
A
guessing
lot of
it's
these
about like The
songs-
Last Human though, so just throwing that out there because of the title. But let's go back to Emily here, and I want to know about your introduction to gaming in general, and then how you fell in love with game audio, because I'm guessing there's some similarities with us here, but I want to know your story here.
Sure. I was born in the 70s, so I grew up in the 80s, which was, the time when all those things were happening. And we did have an Atari, but I threw the controller, which my mother witnessed, and then she took it away, and I never saw it again. So that was I did get a Game Boy when I was in maybe like maybe like 8th grade or something, 7th. So maybe like late 80s. But again, I only had 2 games. I had Super Mario World, which is great. And to this day, one of my favorites. I used to play it every night. Like, it took 45 minutes to get through the whole game. And then I think I had Kirby's the Kirby Game Boy, but I lost it. And then I had like a World Cup soccer game. I mean, it was just weird. I just didn't, and then my friends I just didn't get to play any of those things when I was a kid, really. I just was not exposed to that. My closest friends, none of them had a console or anything like that. So, it wasn't until I was in my early 20s, I got a PS2 and played Grand Theft Auto 3, which was like such a crazy thing to play for, like, here's what games are like now, in 2002, I think it was, or 1 or 2. And then from there on, I've had every PlayStation. I've had a bunch of different Xboxes. I have a Switch. So I just, like, from Grand Theft Auto 3 on. And then when PS3 came out and I had Oblivion, that really changed my perception to Elder Scrolls 4, right? Oblivion. So that was pretty meaningful, hearing that music. That was the most cinematic experience I felt like I'd had, really, just based off of the things I was playing. I mean, Grand Theft Auto could be very cinematic too, but musically speaking, So that's kind of how that happened. And then I just gamed a lot. I mean, I didn't really have a community, or I didn't really like go into forums or anything like that. I was so unaware of any of that. It really wasn't until 2011, early 2011, when Video Games Live was coming to Minneapolis to play at Orchestra Hall, that everything kind of changed. And then I started the podcast, or Sam and I started the podcast together. And then, that's kind of it.
I think what's interesting to me is I'm curious how you pitched the idea to NPR. How did that get off the ground? Because I feel like, and again, this may be a little bit of bias, but I feel like even in 2011, there was still a little bit of hesitancy around video game music as anything to be taken seriously, especially in something as, NPR, like public radio. They're like, oh, I don't know about that, but you made it and it's, successful. So what was the story there?
I would say that's still true. true even there. We did leave, right? So it wasn't like we were really welcomed with open arms, and it didn't really work there. And there are a lot of reasons why it didn't work there, some of which I can and talk about, which would be like, the format, right? Like I was working for the classical station. I was full-time in the classical station. I did not work for the news. Like Minnesota Public Radio is huge. It's a big media empire, like in a kind of a scary, unfair way, but it's awesome. And it's amazing. But so I worked on the 4th floor for the classical department, and that just automatically excluded a tremendous amount of music for us to be able to cover. It had to sound as classical as possible. And, just the music I've played today, neither of those tracks were something I would have felt comfortable playing on the air in 2011 or 12 or 13 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, it was a really tough sell. But I would say, to answer your question, Sam was really instrumental in that, because Sam has always been a consumer of content in like this really freaky way. Like he was at the time really into podcasts and talk radio and talk things. So, and now of course he's really into YouTube, and he consumes a lot of his media on YouTube. So he, I think, was able to spin it in a way, because public radio just, nationally speaking, you kind of have to drag it into current times. Radio, they just want to stay like, you're like, well, this landscape is changing. This might be a good idea. And, there were other podcasts, like This American Life had already been going on for years. Yeah, and so that they had a successful platform there. And, so I hope that kind of answers it. Like Sam did more of that than I did. He was the one who said, let's do a podcast. Because the first thing that had happened is I wrote this article about Video Games Live that got like 10 times as many views as any other article ever in the history of the classical website. So they're like, maybe there's something to this video game stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And that was like, it was in the beginnings of like film, like the film industry being left in the dust by the profits from video games too. So we were able to be like, look, this statistic just came out that for the first time ever, games made more than films or whatever, So that's kind of how
2010, 2011, like the early 2010s, I guess, is when I feel like there was this weird tipping point for game audio getting more notoriety than it had previously had. So I feel like you jumped in at like a really crucial time to get things off the ground. Had you started maybe 5 years earlier, I don't know if the impact would have been there, and
or if you'd even been able to get the show off the ground to begin with.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. We did get in there right at the right time, and I mean, the first person I tried to get an interview with was Jesper Kyd about Assassin's Creed. I can't remember which AC game had just come out, but I was like in the middle of playing that. Maybe, I don't know. I don't remember which one it was, but and so, I just like went to his website, and it's the contact button, which took me to his PR agent. And it was just like the start of this really great relationship, because no one cared before. No one gave a shit about video game music. Nobody reached out for interviews, let alone someone from an actual reputable media company. You know what I mean? So it was like, it was really good timing, which I think about often. Like we were pretty lucky. It was definitely right place, right time, right all the things, like the right energy from Sam and me, and like it all worked out.
Right. I think that part of our success was the fact that nobody was reaching out to a lot of these composers about interviews. And so we've had, composers from all over the world come on the show simply because nobody else was asking, right? Like it was easy for us to just go, hey, like, can we talk about your music and your career? And people would say, yes, like,
sure, why
please,
not?
Why not? Like nobody else has asked. So made it pretty easy there. I feel like it's a little harder now because there's so much, there's so much flux and there's a lot of, things going on with people, like, they're working on multiple projects. So that gets a little bit challenging. But back in the day, reaching out to composers that hadn't done work in like 10, 15 years. Oh, it's like cakewalk. Would just be like, hey, let's do an interview next week. And they're like, sure.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
Fun fact is one of our earliest shows was covering, I wasn't on the show at the time, but was covering some very obscure soundtracks from Jesperkide. So Brian, Subterranea and whatnot.
Subterranea,
like
Red
third
Zone
episode or something.
Yeah.
But there, it was kind of my introduction. When I heard that, I'm like, I just basically kept listening and never stopped, and now I'm here on the show.
So funny story about Jesperkide is that we reached out to him actually to get him on the show at one point, and their PR agent was asking for I think they were saying something like here's the price per hour for, and I was like, wait, no,
what?
Yeah, this was a long time ago. Yeah, so we were just like, well, we're a nonprofit show, so we're not we're not going to put out a ton of money. But I wonder if it was just miscommunication. So yeah.
I didn't end up getting an interview with him then. I did eventually, and I have met him and all the things. But it's like, then the agent was like, well, Jesper's not available, but would you be interested in Enon Zur from Dragon Age or Gary Scheinman from BioShock? And I'm like, yes.
Those are great interviews. Yeah.
I know. So that's what I mean. Like, it was that timing, like where no one was asking. And so all you had to do was ask, and they're like, yes, you can have the BioShock and the Dragon Age composer and the Assassin's Creed composer and the Call of Duty composer and all the things. So yeah, it was great.
Nice. Gene, you want to get into another track here?
Yeah, let's do that. You said you had something queued up for us.
I do, yeah. So Rob Kovacs wrote the soundtrack for Straylight, and it's just so good. It's been one of my just absolute favorites from the year. So let me get a track name here for you. I just have to find it.
I love Rob Kovacs.
He's such a great dude. Oh my God. Yeah.
He comes out to MagWest pretty much every year. I've put him on in the jam space a few times. He's a wonderful musician. Very great guy.
Good.
Yeah.
Such a nice guy. Okay, here's the OST. Let's do Starforge.
All right. That was Starforge from Straylight, composed by Rob Kovacs.
You know, I will say this. I'm starting to get a sense for your taste, and having heard your story, I understand it now, but I thought your taste was going to lean a lot more classical just because I listened to so much of Top Score.
But I guess right.
You were just constrained by the format a little bit. So I think that kind of makes sense why I had that association.
I think there's a couple reasons for that because, traditionally from my childhood till present day, I do listen to a lot of classical music. Like that's, if I'm going to go to a record store, that's like the first place I go is the classical section because people don't know what they're throwing away and it's the best. And like people know with like Bob Dylan, but with like classical, they just have no idea. They'll just put in like the best Baroque music band playing the best Baroque music stuff, and they just have no clue. So I listen to a lot of that, and I do love it. But I also love synth wave and synth music and throwback synth stuff, and just like I just love synthy stuff.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that as we were all just kind of like listening to that track, I was like, oh man, let me find something orchestral for her. But I mean, I just lately that's been not as common, although I will say Scientific's Jet score, it has a lot of orchestral elements to it. But yeah, that's probably a little bit of where that comes from.
That's totally fine. I mean, on our show, we tend to bias it a lot towards, very Japanese, very melodic music. And then every once in a while, I'll get a bug like, Brian, we just need a lot of like dance music techno on the show. I don't care. I just like, we need to finally like satisfy that craving I've had for like months.
Right.
But then we have like, we'll get into these random, what it comes down to at the end of the day is what we're feeling in the moment.
Yeah.
And we usually have a style that we kind of like fall back on as kind of like a comfort zone, but like
our house style.
Yeah. But there's definitely these, we get a bug and we're just like, we just got to talk about this song or this track or this soundtrack.
Or this composer or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes the music doesn't line up with what we usually play. So throw people for a loop. It's great.
It is.
I will have an orchestral one for next time. I already know what. Well, I would. Let's not. Oh, it's playing right now. I don't want to oversell myself and say it's 100% ready, but I know where I'm going to go. So let's go there.
One thing I wanted to do is we have some listener questions. You might recognize this one. Utopia Nemo is on our Discord.
Oh yeah,
he's a lover of VGM. He's been a guest on our show.
Awesome,
he says,
dude.
First and foremost, hi, Emily. Fancy seeing you here.
Amazing. Yeah, what a guy. Yeah.
But second of all, he asks, with you interviewing all of these A-list composers, it sounds like you kind of started almost pretty organically, but how did you start to develop some of those relationships? I mean, you're talking to people at the top of the game.
Yeah, that's... I often wonder that, but I think it still goes back to being in the right place at the right time, where I was one of the first people who asked and showed interest in a professional way, right? I mean, I think, it was clear that I not only am a fangirl, but I like to think I kind of know what I'm talking about usually with music. And, I'll pick up on things and that composers get really excited about when people hear those things. They're like, oh, this is why I do this, so that people will hear it. And half the time people aren't paying attention. And I feel like I'm that way when it comes to my surroundings. Like I'm playing Tears of the Kingdom right now, of course. And I realized I was like playing a little bit kind of late last night. So I was pretty tired because I'd worked in the morning and whatever. And I was like going toward this shrine. I was like, I see it. I'm going to walk across this landscape to this shrine. And I did it. And as I got to the shrine, I was like, I didn't pay attention to a single thing that I was like walking past, and I think some people are like that with music, right? It's just background.
I'm like that with driving. Like, I don't even realize.
Yeah, but it's that, right? It's like, and so I think that was meaningful. And then I did get invited to do some PAX panels and stuff really early on. And then you're kind of thrust into these social interactions. And then, next thing you know, like you've made lifelong friendships with some of these folks. And that's been amazing. But I think it's a very mutual respect. Like I don't want to like put myself up on this pedestal or anything, but that's the feedback I get from them too. They're like, it's just, you were the first, you were the one who, you ask questions about this chord progression, or you ask about this counter melody, or you ask about, this theme coming back. And
yeah. And, I do want to start moving on to talking about level in just a sec. But one thing I do want to really give you credit for is that, however you felt about Top Score, it did really give a lot of credibility. I mean, it was an official publication. Had a very, very nice sounding microphones, and the format was just really solid. And I think it really did do a lot to give credibility to the acceptability of video game music, not just podcasts, but hey, people are talking about this in a formal way that's not just two guys on microphones like us. But but I mean, of course we've had our fair share of adventures, but I felt like it really was like a serious podcast in the ways that really, started to elevate. And for that, I got to give you a lot of credit.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And I certainly don't want to come across as not loving Top Score. I still call level Top Score sometimes. And I'm just like, oh my God.
It happens.
I loved that show. It was great. The name was perfect. Everything was great. So yeah, it was good.
But yeah, so tell us about Level. I mean, you've been doing that since I think 2015, and it's up to the present now. I think it's still is it
weekly?
I think there may have been a little break in there for reasons. I'm not sure what happened in 2020, but
Well, we had a lot of breaks in a lot of spots for a lot of various reasons. But we've been cranking them out weekly now for a year and a half almost. And so that's the pace we hope to keep.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think we did take a week off for the Christmas holiday. And then we took a week off for VGM Con because that was just too much to juggle all that. But otherwise, it's weekly and with notable dropouts in the past, but those are hopefully long behind us. And especially now, I mean, there's just too much content. It's too easy to book yourself out, and
yes.
That has made me have to be a lot pickier, which is interesting. I haven't felt that way about the podcast ever before this year, where I'm like, oh, there's only about 50 shows a year, and that's not a lot when there's about 50,000 soundtracks a year. So
it kind of sucks, right? It's impossible to catch up.
It is.
We're in the same boat. We only have about 20 to 30 shows because unfortunately this is really just something that we do in our spare time. So it is a lot of work, and it's always there's always more of it arriving faster than we can keep up,
Exactly. It's crazy, especially when you start mining the past too, right? Like you guys are really have so many guests on from, 20 years ago or 30, whatever. And that's you could just go on and on and on. Yeah.
And Gina and I also have a problem where we have a list of episodes we plan on doing, and then we just start adding more in between, before. So we actually just keep pushing things out, and we end up, 10 episodes deep. We're like, oh yeah, we got to get to those other ones we already had planned.
Yes.
And we've rabbit holed on some pretty obscure topics over the years. So sometimes it's like, hey, Brian, I have a great idea for a show. And it's like, okay, I guess we're talking to George Stone about Canyon.mid today. So it was an awesome show, but it was just I don't think most of our listeners would have expected us to go that direction with it. But that said, so I mean, tell us a little bit more about Level. I mean, obviously you continued the show. Did you kind of see it as just a continuation with a broader format? What was kind of the thought behind it?
Well, there were a lot of things that we were grateful to get the opportunity to do with Level that we couldn't with Top Score. One was at the end there, Top Score was a 5-minute show. And that was just obviously not enough time. That was a really difficult thing to fulfill. And, we would release also longer versions, but it was just really not quite what we wanted to do to be able to showcase all the amazing content that's out there. And so it was really exciting to start Level because we knew just automatically there were so many scores out there that we could highlight and spend a lot of time highlighting.
Yeah.
And also we could branch out beyond music, which we don't do too often, but there are episodes, in the last 6 months, we've probably had 3 or 4 episodes that really don't have a lot of music at all. So, maybe they're just primarily about audio in games. Maybe it's a voice actor. Maybe it's, whatever reason. We've even had people on who don't do games really, or that we're interviewing about a project that's not a game. Like last week's episode was about a Netflix show, but it's a composer who happens to also be the guy who did Guacamelee and Guacamelee 2 and some other cool things. So we could talk about that, but the crux of the interview was about a Canadian comedy. So it was just really freeing, I guess. And over the years, as I got, I think, better at interviewing and worked harder at trying to make good interviews, it just gave us just all these opportunities to have really nice long form chats with people about cool stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, coming from the news and just classical music, radio and stuff like that, you probably didn't have experience doing many interviews. So when you start bringing these people on, and this is also something that Gene and I could probably relate to, is we had no experience doing interviews, and
hardly.
We didn't know what made a good interview. Yeah. So what do you find, I guess, in your interviews that you have learned? Like, what is something that you now kind of have used in all of your interviews as, I guess, what I'm trying to say is, your guiding principles for how you construct your interviews, and what do you find that could be the most compelling about what your interviewee is talking about?
I mean, that, like, we could talk about that for the rest of the day. Like, I think about it all the time.
Maybe we should have a music break.
Yeah.
We might want to, this might be a great place to drop in another track, but what, did you have something else lined up? And we will come back, and because we actually have a follow-up question about almost exactly that topic, but throw something at us.
Yeah, let's do something from Heavy Rain by Normand Corbeil from 2010, I think. It was it was a while ago.
I loved Heavy Rain.
Heavy Rain is so great, and I loved this interview from way in my past. I probably would laugh hysterically hearing myself do it now, but let's do Lauren Winter's main theme, I think.
All right, let's take a listen to that. That was Lauren Winter's main theme from the game Heavy Rain, composed by Norman Corbeil, and it's a beautiful, lush track. We don't play stuff like that on our show too much, but that doesn't mean I don't enjoy listening to it. It's really
I love this soundtrack.
Yeah.
I love this soundtrack so much.
So good. That game was so good too. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that was definitely right around the time when, however people feel about Heavy Rain, when games were really becoming kind of a realization of cinematic. You could really tell a story in a very cinematic way pretty effectively. I mean, the PS3 was a powerful enough piece of hardware. We were definitely past the point of potato people running around in little cutscenes like in Grand Theft Auto 3. But it was just a showcase of a game. I remember seeing footage from it and just being blown away when it first came out.
So beautiful, everything about it. Oh my God. Yeah.
Listen to the soundtrack all the way through many, many times.
It's a winner.
Very good. Okay, so back to my question that's going to take forever.
I will try to not make the answer take forever.
Yeah, we have a similar question actually from Mike at XVGM. He says, "Hey Emily, fellow VGM podcaster here. What would you say is most important, having a strong guest or a strong theme that you're covering?"
I don't do themes, so that's my answer to that. I can't remember the last time I did a theme-based thing. It's possible that I did something like that on Top Score, but I've never worked like that. And I know there are plenty of people who structure their shows like that, and I think that's awesome. Like, I'm kind of jealous of it in a way, but that's just not how I don't think that's the kind of fan I am, for one thing. Like, I can't just be like, if you were like, Emily, name me your top 5 water tracks from music, I could be like, oh, well, there's the Mario one. and then it would take me like 20 minutes to like go through a list of like water themed video. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like usually focused on either the person or the game or both. Right. But like McLean Deemer, for instance, who's done Guild Wars 2, he did Salt and Sacrifice, done all kinds of things. And I've had him on for all of those things. And so when I have McLean on, it's about the game. We're talking about that specific game because we've talked about all the other things before. I don't need to rehash his life story or any of that. So we're really focused on the game. So I guess that's kind of how that works. And then as far as like how I prep, like, first of all, prepping for an interview is just a necessity, which it seems like but some people just don't know how. And I mean, for me, the way I do it, I just listen to the soundtrack and take notes. I mean, it's that simple. And I take whatever sounds interesting to me. And I think, if I find it interesting, then I write a note about it and ask a question about it, in most cases. And I did have a lot of chances to do interviews, just as, whether it's in a reporting style or just covering content for Classical Minnesota Public Radio. I had done a lot of interviewing before I started Top Score, and that definitely helped. And of course, most of that would have been live in person. And so it's a little easier to not be live in person,
Right.
I think. So, I guess, man, since I edit content for people who do interviews, I do spend a lot of time thinking about this, because you can make it really easy on yourself by being prepared and keeping your questions succinct, if you can, or you can make it really hard for yourself by being unprepared and not writing down your questions. I mean, it's just like, write out the questions, and that goes a long way to like keeping everything really clean. And then if you have your list in front of you, and then I always have a notepad in front of me too, so I can jot things down so I don't forget. Although you'll hear me in interviews all the time being like, oh, I forget what I was just about to say. And that's because I didn't write it down. But I just have tricks for that. And
and I don't know why this turned into an inside baseball show about podcasting, but I really appreciate you saying all of these things, because the truth is we do a lot of that kind of thing. We put a lot of effort into making these conversations we have our questions laid out, but we put it in a structure that's somewhat improvisatory, so it can be kind of a shifting conversation that moves around. And so oftentimes, if you hear me typing during this, it's because Brian and I are in our document sort of like, oh, let's make sure to ask about this since that came up.
Yeah.
And like try to, but we do a lot of prep, a lot of, because the end result is these things sound very natural. And yes, part of that's editing, but a lot of it is just the prep, how do we structure the interview so that the questions come up roughly where they're going to probably talk about this thing. And we've been pretty on even with you as well.
Yeah.
So, we kind of knew when you were going to bring up the stuff about, top level. So it was kind of like, great, we're doing well. So
yeah. It's when I was working for about 5 years, I did the morning show at the jazz station here in Minneapolis, and I would have 2 guests on a day live that I would interview, and some of those were rotating. So like I always had the meteorologist, like the state climatologist on, and we'd talk about the weather for the week, and so that was very structured and like I knew what to expect every week. But then I always had guests, not every day, but because every day I had 2 guests on, but sometimes they were just random normal people that I had never interviewed before, and that really honed my chops being live and also only having 8 minutes. Yeah. So that really made me kind of get things tighter and snappier, I think, is what it is. And it also helped me to give up some of my type A editing,
Yeah. At a certain point, you just got to give it up. For me, and this was something I wanted to say up at the top of the show when that came up, is as long as it's not getting in the way of understandability, for me, it's just there's a certain kind of musicality to the editing. I come from a musical background. Even if it's kind of a long and somewhat rambling thing, if it flows naturally, it's okay.
Yeah. I'm obsessed with audio. Like when I'm watching documentaries, I'm always listening to how they're editing the person talk, because I can tell if they're piecing sentences together just because of how the tone changes in the words they're saying. And I'm obsessed with it. Everything that I listen to, I just hear that stuff. I'm just naturally listening to it.
I do the same thing.
You can't not hear it now. After you've edited any show, there's like some technical podcasts that I listen to, and there's parts that just make me cringe. I'm like, you guys needed to add time in there. It's so unnerving. But yeah, the organization I think is critical to doing proper interviews, and I appreciate you saying that, because sometimes it's easily overlooked because it sounds so natural coming out the other end, right? But that's because it's carefully guided and it has a lot of prep behind it. The hardest part for us, I think, has been things like Japanese interviews, where I have to write down, I have to remember the translation, like I have to remember what the guest is saying to where I can translate it back, but also have something good to go against what they're saying. So it's like a multi-point process, and it gets pretty challenging. So
thankfully I'm only doing it in one language. So
I wanted to ask another question, and this is not, no need to pick favorites here, but you've talked to hundreds of guests now over this, the podcasts have taken you to so many different places. Do you have any highlights of your work? I mean, for us, we could definitely bring up some, but we're a little bit tired of talking about the Library of Congress. But in general, we're still stunned that they invited us, and to this day we're just awed that even happened. But
of course,
you've probably had so many experiences now, just like, I can't believe that my life took me in this direction. And what are some of those?
I mean, oh my God! I'm looking through my list now, and I usually I say Normand Corbeil is one that I almost always say, which is why I played one of his tracks, because rest in peace to such a beautiful composer, who just did not give one shit about video games at all, which I love that. He's just like, I'm just going to write this beautiful music. I'm not a gamer. He's like 70 years old. He didn't care. Or however old he was. I don't want to presume, But yeah, that one really stood out in my mind because it really was about the music. This was not about him like giving the gamer a certain experience. This was about him writing the best possible music he could for the product, and that was really. And there have been others like that too. But in recent memory, I feel like we're so lucky in this community because there are so many awesome people. Like, of course, people that I consider my friends, like Gary Scheiman, Jason Graves, Enon Zur, Chris Velasco, Jesse Harlan, like all of those. I love talking to people that I've known for years. Like every single one of those conversations is awesome for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
But then people that I've talked to for the first time, like, and I think you had him on too, Jeff Van Dyke and his wife, Angela.
My God.
Love that guy.
It was such a touching interview. It was one of my favorite shows that we've ever done. It was totally unexpected. Yeah.
Yep. Just absolutely love talking to him. And his wife, Angela, loved talking about unpacking all the things.
Just a wonderful singer.
Yeah.
She's amazing. Yeah. Every song that I've heard from her, I was blown away. But yeah, I wish we'd gotten the chance to talk with her as well, but maybe one day.
Yes, exactly. I don't know. It's too many good ones. There really are. There's just a lot of good. I think, recently Amos Roddy talking about Citizen Sleeper, that soundtrack was so moving. And then Scientific, like I was talking about earlier, loved that interview with him. Absolutely loved it. I can't wait. I'll be listening to it again to prep because we'll talk sometime in the next few months, and I can't wait to hear it again. So yeah, just lots.
It's kind of like picking your children or something, because
I know.
I go back and I'm like, oh, what are some of my favorite shows that we've done? And I'll just scroll through the list and I'm like, oh my God, I loved this show, or I loved this one. This one was so fun.
But you love them for different reasons. Sometimes the banter is just hilarious. Other times you just get into some of these, deeply personal stories that you weren't expecting. It's not like you can really pit them against each other in a certain kind of way. Like, oh no, this is absolutely better than this other show. It's just not like that. But yeah.
Anyways,
we are wrapping up pretty close. We wanted to be mindful of the time, but we have.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'm sure you hate this question, but do you have any favorite soundtracks? That's kind of another question from Utopia Nemo. I'm sure that's
so you can blame him.
Fair. And he probably knows.
He probably does.
Or maybe he doesn't. I don't mean to put him on the spot, but I mean, I do. I some of them I've talked about a bunch of times. Like there's one by Steve Pardo, who used to work for Harmonix out in Boston, on a bunch of the titles that they made there, but now he lives in Nashville and has his own or co-owns or something sound and composing studio in Nashville, and he did a soundtrack for a game called Signs of the Sojourner. And I will go back to that soundtrack until the day I die. Like I love the vibe of this soundtrack so much. It's like in a minor key, but it's still got all this like really good hope, like vibe to it in this really cool thing. So I often bring that one up because I think everyone should listen to Signs of the Sojourner. It's such a good soundtrack. I will always love anything Mike Moraski does, whether it's Half-Life 2, or, music for Half-Life, or whether it's his Team Fortress music, Portal. I just think he's probably one of the most brilliant people walking the planet in so many different ways. And so I love all of his music, but probably in particular Portal 2 and Half-Life Alyx. Who else recently? I'm trying to think of recent. Well, Citizen Sleeper, I would definitely put that on the recent list of music that really blew me away. And then pretty much anything Gary Scheiman ever touches. So yeah, definitely Bioshock, all of the Bioshocks, the score, right? Not the soundtrack's great. All the licensed stuff is awesome. Yes. But the score that Gary did for those Bioshock games, each one outdoes the next. And that stuff I just think is brilliant. So in particular, Bioshock Infinite, like I think some of that combat music is some of the most creative combat music I've heard to this day. And I can stop now because otherwise I'll just keep going. But, I mean, obviously Skyrim, like I have a Skyrim tattoo. Like I loved all of that too, regardless of the type of person that wrote the music's still great. So yeah.
I do love that soundtrack.
I am glad you had some answers, because I was just chatting with Brian yesterday about how I hate being asked this question because I don't even, it's like, for what context, right? Like there are soundtracks that I grew up listening to as a kid that I will never let go. Other ones that I discovered recently that are amazing. This one is some weird off the wall soundtrack that, doesn't.
Yeah.
It only makes sense. Yeah. It only makes sense when it's like, what are your top 5 today? Because
exactly.
That's really
tomorrow,
it.
Tomorrow it'll be like Dragon Age and something else. Like, who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways,
since you brought up Signs of the Sojourner, I think we're going to end the show with a track from that. But before we get out of here, did you have any final comments, thoughts, plugs, anything?
Where can we find you?
Yeah, all of that, all of the stuff.
You can find us in a lot of random places. I mean, honestly, just wherever you get your podcasts, look for Level with Emily. We're on Patreon, and we could always use patrons. I think, we have never taken income from the show, so it's been up for a while. But we love it, and we're going to do it no matter what. So that would be great. Check us out there. We are live on YouTube. We try to be live every Wednesday at 3 Central. That doesn't always work. If I have a radio shift or something like that, we might reschedule, but we do try to meet up live on YouTube once a week and just chat with people. And we're trying to get that going. We've only been doing it for a few weeks. And that's been really fun. So you can find us on YouTube. Level with Emily Reese, I think, is the YouTube channel officially. And what else? What am I forgetting? We do have events. We're going to have a listening party for patrons coming up, which is just people bring a track and we listen to it together and talk. And just check out the show. I hope you like it. We try to make it sound really nice. And
so far, so good. Just keep what you got. Keep doing what you're doing. And I can't see you having any problems. So
I hope
and we always put links to everything as much as we can that you mentioned. Obviously, anything from your show, but even, all the music that we talked about, we'll try to put links to everything in the show, show notes and whatnot. But yeah, we try to be somewhat, accurate about maintaining records, because oftentimes, so we're the ones that find this information, not on purpose, but it just kind of ends up that way.
Yeah.
So we try to at least archive it somewhere. But in your case, you're a contemporary show, but we'll make sure people get the links to it. We'll send people your way.
Awesome.
I'm going to be listening to more of it. I never fully got caught up with Top Score. I think I made it through like 2 years worth, but I'm going to start listening to Level to see where I get. But
I think it's a good idea with Level, personally, to start now and go backwards. You do what you want to do, but I feel like just the way I grew over the years as an interviewer and also just the consistency of our show, it's really been the last year, and even though we've been doing it since 2015, I would say it's really just been since like late 2021 that we really started cranking on it. So that's where I think is the sweet spot. But there's so many guests over the years that, you do you, whatever you want.
So start backwards works just as fine as starting from the beginning. So
do whatever you want, really.
And some of our earliest episodes are definitely a little bit rough around the edges.
We're just figuring it out. So
exactly, you're just like trying to figure out how to do it and what sounds good and all of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Emily, thank you so much for taking time to join
thank you.
us today. This is a different show. We don't normally do themes either. And this was an Emily theme. So
I like that. Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time chat with us. You have a lot of fans, and you've just been instrumental in helping guide game audio to reach the masses more. And so thank you for all your contributions over the years, and hope to see you keep it going strong for many years to come.
Oh, yeah. I cannot imagine not doing it. I mean, Sam and I talk about it all the time. I'm like, I just can't imagine not. So I'm grateful. And thank you for your time. And just really nice to meet you, Brian and Jean. It was so good to meet you in person. So thank you both. Yeah.
You're a kindred spirit. I feel like I'm hearing myself talk a lot of these times, but more articulately than I usually say it.
Give yourself more credit. Yeah.
Well, so we mentioned again, you had a track, or maybe not yet picked out, but from Signs of the Sojourner. What do you want us to take the show out with? And any comments about it as why you picked the track or anything is good.
Steve Pardo, the composer, I think he has just such a he's just the real deal. You know what I mean? Like he just, that's the best compliment I can give him. He's the real deal. So when you hear a track from him, you're like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. You know, I mean, it's so good. So let me see it. I either want it to be, maybe that, or I'm sorry, give me just 1 second. Oh God.
It's tough.
It's so good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anka is the name of it. It's Anka.
Perfect.
And it starts with this really cool guitar solo from a friend of his who was just playing a bunch of effects and just kind of improvising, and then it melds into the track itself. So what it starts like is not what it actually ends up sounding like, if that makes sense. And so, you know, give it a 1.5 minutes or something like that. And then it just kicks into this really cool groove with just the instrumentation is so good. And it's just one of those soundtracks where you're like, this would be amazing live. Like this would slap. So that's how I feel about it. But now I'm just thinking about so many others I want to talk about, but we'll have to do this again sometime.
We'd love to have you back.
We'll hold you to that.
Okay, good. Cool.
Emily, again, thank you so much. The track taking us out is Anka or
Anka, I don't know.
Anka?
Yeah.
What one of them?
Anka sounds so much better. Yeah.
The track taking us out is Wonka from Steve Pardo, Signs of the Sojourner. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.